As is usual, every game under the sun wants to release over the course of the same week, well, week and a half. And there were a lot of fairly short games that I got sent review keys for, so I figure let's just see how many of them I can cover without compromising on review quality. Fortunately or unfortunately, the first one that got in line this week was a fairly short tower defense game with deck building called The Necromancer Cometh, that's now in early access. Now, for those that have been around for a while, you know I like most tower defense games, from very simple to nightmarishly complex, and I like deck builders. I just find both genres very cathartic. This game falls in the category of being, well, fine on that spectrum, but still has a ways to go, and doesn't feel quite feature complete just yet, despite having a fully functional campaign, post-game, and endless mode. Though it also isn't bad either, since what it does fairly well, and they were making changes up through release, not just to mechanics, but to difficulty as well. When I originally went through the campaign, it took me about 4 to 5 hours, and it was a fairly simple ordeal that I sort of blitzed through as soon as I figured out my own personal gimmick of just overloading on money generation and spamming ranged towers of various types depending on the level, with the final level actually resulting in me spamming all of one tower only, the basic archer towers. With the Day Zero patch, at least on the endless mode, there were quite a few quality of life updates compared to what you'll see in the background, but also a bit of difficulty pass as well. That is good in some cases and a bit rough in others. On the plus side, they made gold auto pickup, which you might notice from time to time without that change. I actually ended up leaving gold on the ground for multiple waves later, since I had nothing to spend it on, and it was a bit of a pain. With auto pickup, you get less of the dopamine release from the loot, but it just does feel more fluid overall. In terms of difficulty, at least again in the endless mode, the boss changes from the early press version to the release version made them a lot tougher to deal with, especially the gargoyle boss that can stop and heal itself, since it healed to full multiple times in the loop until I just happened to force it down in one of my densest tower zones. Prior to the update, they'd get about halfway through my gauntlet with similar units. So with these changes, your time to beat the campaign proper might be different and slightly longer than mine, unless you're really solid at juggling your setup stage to stage, but even with that, the Necromancer campaign, which is the completed one, still likely will not cross the 10-hour mark for most people, though there is a coming soon note for a second campaign, and of course towers, missions, etc. associated with it. And I would not be surprised if we see additional tower unlocks for that next campaign, or in the future in general. And I would hope that we see more progression options, since the meta progression currency currently available is actually way more than you need unless you want to run an extremely bloated deck, which in general is a bad idea in deck builders, since it makes drawing less consistent. Now, how the meta progression itself works is actually fine. Sure, I'd like to see more deck building and global modifiers, but currently you spend a certain amount of currency on each card in your deck, which gets refunded if you remove it from your deck, and then you spend the rest on boosting your initial gold. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and good enough despite not being my favorite system and not being as engaging as I would hope. Now personally, I would love to see it shift more towards the deck builder aspect itself, since mechanically, it could do a lot, ranging from reshuffles to stretch the deck further, due to there only being a handful of basic unit cards that are limitless, so you do end up spamming a ton of those compared to any other unit. By doing deck building modifiers, it would make this aspect far more engaging. This is important since the tower defense part is, well, pretty normal, with the only thing missing being that there's a lack of direct tower upgrades specifically on the towers. Sure, you can play cards to boost attack speed, damage, and gold generation for all towers and kills, and then there's towers themselves called orbs with area of effects that are stronger but similar on them. But once you place a tower, the most you'll do is either change its targeting or pick it up to move it, which results in later waves of the longer levels being somewhat bland, and I kind of wish I could set a default targeting for the towers, since going through and changing 100 of them over to target the boss is pretty sluggish feeling, especially whenever it's necessary for certain waves. The only somewhat special thing, and this is done in a few other tower defense titles, so more uncommon than unique, is that the towers do come in 2 sizes. Namely the normal 1 slot that most of them are, as well as a couple 2x2 towers, such as the Skull and the Gold Mine, that take up more space and can be a bit of a mixed bag for mazing, even though they are strong in and of themselves. Now, as this is early access, the balance of all these things are likely to be shifted multiple times before the 1.0 release, but the basic functionality is there, and it feels like at this point, most of the new content will be progression and balancing if they follow normal development patterns. Though I would love to see them take the mechanical aspects further to give it a strong selling point rather than just being another tower defense, just with minor card mechanics. The aesthetic does not really help with this somewhat generic feel. It really comes across like something that would have been a top-tier Newgrounds or Armor Games title just back in the day, which, for nostalgic old folk with creaky knees like me, it's a plus, but I also know that games with that aesthetic struggle to really get traction unless they bring something really unique to the plate. And the need for a wow factor is even more important in a genre like tower defense. So in short, if you're looking to run the tower defense gamut, this is actually an okay pickup. It is a tower defense game that does the job just fine, and it has an endless mode. I just think to stand out in the genre, you need to do something unique. You need to make people engage in more depth than just placing towers.